Ali, we had a couple of, and Asa, we had some news discussion topics that we wanted to get into, including, what Sheer was talking about, the generals revolting. They're talking about being low on munitions, etc. But there's also the U.S. delusions. We had U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken speaking at the Brookings Institute a couple of days ago. Where does the U.S. kind of fit into this dynamic? Sheer was talking about how the New York Times article about Israel running low on munitions and morale, says more about the U.S. response than much else, and it's written from a U.S. centered perspective. What can we say about?
Yeah, that's a very interesting reading from Sheer, and he made some points I hadn't thought of. But I had my own reading of this article, and I think it's worth going back to and just looking at some of the elements of it. And this was published in the New York Times yesterday as we're speaking. Israeli generals low on munitions want a truce in Gaza. And it's a very long article, so I'm obviously not going to read the whole thing, but I'm just going to highlight a few of the points in it. And the top line really sums it up. Israel's top generals want to begin a ceasefire in Gaza, even if it keeps Hamas in power for the time being, widening a rift between the military and Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, who has opposed a truce that would allow Hamas to survive the war. And so you can see, again, this is the open conflict now between the military and the political echelon in Israel. And they say that this reflects a major shift in thinking over the past months as it became more clear that Mr. Netanyahu was refusing to articulate or commit to a post-war plan. I think what it reflects is the reality on the ground that John has been showing us, that this army is having its clock cleaned, so to speak. I think that's the right term, right? I think it's a sports terminology. But they quote the Israeli military spokesperson, Daniel Hagari, who said a few weeks ago, "Those who think we could make Hamas disappear are wrong. Hamas is an idea. Hamas is a political party. It is rooted in people's hearts." And then they say, we covered this in our segment with Shir Hever, but the article points out that the Israeli army is made up largely of reservists. Some are on their third tour of duty since October and struggling to balance the fighting with their professional and family commitments. And fewer reservists are reporting for duty. It hints at problems with discipline, command and control, lack of confidence in military leadership. And it talks about, it says more than 300 soldiers have been killed in Gaza and more than 4,000 wounded. But regular viewers will know that those numbers are a gross. The New York Times is publishing them as if these are high numbers, but we know that the real numbers are much, much higher. But the point here, they're saying Israel is paying a very high price, even though they're not admitting to the full price. And this is very interesting. They say that at least some tanks in Gaza are not loaded with the full capacity of the shells that they usually carry, as the military tries to conserve its stocks in case a bigger war with Hezbollah does break out. 5 officials and officers confirmed that the army was running low on shells. The army also lacks spare parts for its tanks, military bulldozers, and armored vehicles, according to several of those officials. So again here, John has been showing us week after week, month after month, the Namer armored personnel carriers, the Merkava tanks, the Caterpillar D9 bulldozers being destroyed or damaged at least and towed out, and these have to be repaired, and they're short on spare parts. They're short on shells. Is that true? Some people have said, oh, this is a bluff by the military. They're saying we need to preserve our shells in case a war breaks out in the north. That's kind of the thread that goes through this article, the idea that, oh, we need to preserve our depleted and rebuild our forces for a war in the north. That's kind of their excuse. Are the shells really running out? How much of this is bluff? How much of this is designed to put pressure by the military on the political echelon? Or maybe it's a pitch to the United States. This was
Right.
all leaked to the New York Times. Maybe it's a pitch to Congress of the United States to say, oh, well, give us more weapons. It could be all of those things, but I think there's some reality to it because, for example, if you follow Brian Baletic and his analysis on the new Atlas, an excellent channel, which I've been following for years, you would know that US and in fact Western production of all types of shells, particularly artillery shells, but also tank shells, is very low because they cannot keep up with the demand from Ukraine, and they have cut their manufacturing capacity back so much. And if you cast your mind back to before this genocide, the US actually removed some of its strategic reserves of munitions, which it keeps in Israel, prepositioned in Israel. It actually removed them from Israel to send them to Ukraine. So there is a shortage of 155 millimeter artillery, of tank shells, of Patriot missiles, of all sorts of air defense systems, and so on. So the Israelis really are running low on weapons that they have been largely using to murder civilians, not to fight Hamas. So I think that's very significant. And it shows, again, it highlights that Israel is really facing military and strategic defeat. So
Yeah.
that's what I want to say about that article. There's a lot more in it. I don't know if other people want
Yeah,
to
can I just
throw in a
jump in?
quick, yeah.
Yeah, the idea that Hamas is an idea, that this was somehow that Hagari, the spokesperson for the IDF, said, Hamas is an idea, it can't be defeated because it's an idea. Hamas is a government. Hamas is a group of people. Hamas is an army. 𝐶assam is an army. And it's that hasn't been defeated. It's not, they don't need to worry about an idea. They can't beat the physical fighters. They can't beat the physical army. They can't destroy the physical government. And so this idea, like it implies like they already defeated all of those, but now there's some idea that they can never put away. And that's just not true. They physically have not defeated the structure of the military. And we're going to see Hamas resume as a government. We already are seeing it on the ground. They are the ones who are facilitating the aid shipments. They are the ones who are dealing with the clans. They are in control. So it's more than an idea. They're losing to the physical existence of 𝐶assam and Hamas.
Yeah, I think that's a
that's
really good point,
yeah.
John. Like, I think this has become this kind of truism of a lot of politicians now. And I think, when they can't, when they finally admit, when there's sort of final admittance that they can't defeat the 𝐶assam Brigades, the armed wing, and even the political wing of Hamas, I think they're sort of setting this up, this idea thing up, as the kind of the excuse for that defeat in advance, it seems.
Yeah, I mean, even look at the hospitals. They can't even defeat the hospitals. The first thing that happens when the Israelis withdraw after sacking and destroying the hospitals, the first thing that happens is the doctors go and start sweeping it up and figuring out how to put it back together. So they're not even defeating the hospitals. I mean, the schools are going to be the next thing. You're going to see makeshift schools that are set up in communities because they can't defeat the school system either. So it's not just the fighters; it's society wide, and they're committing these atrocities and still losing on every single score.
Well, those are all excellent points. And what it shows really, I mean, Daniel Hagari's statement that Hamas is an idea and it can't be defeated. Yes, it's a way of evading the reality that they can't defeat the physical presence, the fighters, the heroism and bravery of everyone who's resisting in Gaza in all the ways they're resisting. But it's also, I think, an admission that Israel has lost the battle of ideas. It's lost the battle for hearts of minds. Obviously, it's not going to win any hearts and minds among Palestinians, but I think even globally, Israel, Hamas has been so demonized for so many decades, and yet people all over the world in the global south understand Hamas to be a legitimate force of resistance, leading a just struggle for liberation against a brutal, evil, genocidal regime. And I think that that understanding in my lifetime has never been more broad. But I'll tell you one place, and maybe we can switch over to Antony Blinken. One place where this is not well understood is in the State Department and in the Biden administration. And so I just wanted to point to Antony Blinken, the Secretary of State, gave a speech at the Brookings Institution, as sort of an official, semi-official think tank in Washington. And he was talking about, just, I guess the headlines I'd take away from this speech, which was on July 1st, is that he continues to lie that Hamas has rejected and Israel has accepted President Biden's ceasefire proposal, when in fact the opposite is the case. And there's one particularly, both in a way ridiculous and revolting quote from Biden, where,
Blinken.
from Blinken, where he talks about, Israel, everyone, the whole world has accepted it. It's just Hamas that's saying no. And he says, one individual, likely buried hundreds of feet underground in Gaza, has the decision-making power to say yes or no. And right now, in not saying yes, Mr. Sinwar, he's talking about Yahya Sinwar, the Hamas leader in Gaza, in not saying yes, Mr. Sinwar is not only holding on to the Israeli, American, and other hostages, he's continuing to make a hostage of Palestinian children, women, and men who are caught in a horrific crossfire of Hamas's making. And this is just so repulsive on so many levels. First of all, again, it repeats the lie that Hamas has refused the ceasefire, but also it blames Palestinians, it blames Hamas for all of Israel's deliberate murder and starvation of Palestinians. And it absolves the United States and Blinken himself, who is personally culpable for these war crimes and atrocity and genocide, and tries to lay all that on the Palestinians itself. And I have no idea who Blinken is speaking to, because no one in the world will accept this except the narrow clique in the United States and the Israel lobby. There is no wide global audience for this. Not even the Europeans believe this anymore. The most sort of abject, pathetic followers of the United States would believe this kind of rhetoric anymore. But I just want to point to a couple of other things Blinken says, because he still has these delusions about a post-war situation. And he says, one way or another, when this conflict ends, it cannot and must not end with a vacuum in Gaza. It has to end in a way that makes sure there are clear, coherent, achievable plans for Gaza's governance, for its security, and of course to start to help people to rebuild their lives that have been so decimated and destroyed. He doesn't add so decimated and destroyed by the United States and Israel. And he says, we've been working over the past months with partners throughout the region to develop those plans. And as I said a couple of weeks ago when I was last in the region, a lot of that work has now turned into concrete ideas, concrete proposals. And he says, we know there are three things that are unacceptable for Gaza's future: an Israeli occupation, Hamas perpetuating its leadership, or chaos, anarchy, lawlessness, which is what we're seeing in big parts of Gaza today. And what I want to say about this is, he's still speaking as if it's Israel and the United States who get to decide. But what we've seen, what the Israeli generals are telling us, what the resistance on the ground is telling us, is it's the resistance that decides. And as Abdel Bari Atwan, the Palestinian commentator, always says, they're always talking about the day after. And he says, the day after Hamas is Hamas. The day after Hamas is Hamas. And that's what John just said, that the governance will resume. So they're still talking as if the United States has the power to assemble a group of Arab traitors and collaborators, which is what they'd be, and Palestinian traitors and collaborators and capos, which is what they'd be, to govern Gaza on behalf of the genocidal enemy. And these delusions still clearly rattling around in the head of Blinken in the State Department. But even the Israeli generals don't think that Hamas can be replaced or removed. And they're saying that we would have to accept Hamas's continued rule. They tried to soften the blow by saying at least for the time being. So you're even getting more of a reality check now from the Israeli generals than you are from the out to lunch Biden administration.
Thanks for watching this video. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel, hit like, leave a comment. These engagements help us with the YouTube algorithm, and it helps us to get around Silicon Valley censorship as much as possible. It does make a difference. You can also support our journalism by going to electronicintifada.net and clicking on donate now. Thank you.